Welcome, everyone, to this exciting new episode of Freedom Hub's Working Group. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host, Charles Frohman. We are a part of the Freedom Hub, where we are the disruptors intersection, and we're definitely connecting all the activists out there. You'll find us living at your-mp.com, so definitely take a look-see, and we will, in fact. We also run an additional program pertinent to cash patients, the idea of having a cash doctor and a cash patient and getting into a market space. So you'll want to check out some past episodes there. And again, most importantly, you want to capture everything at the main website. So let's take a quick detour in there before we jump into today. When you get over to the site, you'll see there's a wealth of information, lots of stuff to drop down and take a look at. But just looking at a couple in particular, if you go under the Home tab, you'll see webinars, which is pertinent today. But then very importantly, continuing the conversation, which is what you're going to do tomorrow. Because after you hear the talk, you're going to probably want to get engaged. And so you'll come back here, and within a couple of days, we'll have up here a link to that particular episode for today, as are all these others from episodes of the past. And this is your way to keep the conversation going, in that donate, lobby, participate, follow, whatever that person's engaged in is your way to start to make this thing go beyond just listening in and having a good time today. Beyond that, though, too, is the people that are fighting for our freedom. So under the Freedom tab, you'll see, if you click on Fighting for Freedom, we've got items that you need to react to as far as issues that are out there that need to have your signature or your efforts, maybe a couple of your bucks, and then a variety of organizations that are all freedom oriented that you may or may not be aware of, and this is your way to connect to them too. So here, let's get into today a little bit. So if you go into the home page and you click on webinars, you end up on this tab, and it has a little intro at the top, and then a breakout of the 2 webinars of the day. A little further is a list of who's coming up. And then, very importantly, here are the links so you can view this from the past. So if we click on the Brighteon link as an example, here you'll see the videos from episodes before, and this is where you'll review ones you haven't had a chance to listen to, or if you're new here, you'll check these out, and then that's your chance to continue the conversation with any of these people you want to engage in. So as we address today's topic, let's let Charles jump in here and give us a rundown on what we're in store for.
Gladly, Jeff, and welcome, Max. This is a favorite topic of mine. It has many names. I know it sort of as conscious capitalism. Max is going to phrase it differently today. But personally, it goes back to when I was at the Cato Institute helping the libertarian politics cause. But personally, I was getting into Kundalini yoga as a teacher. And I met some change agents that combine those 2 different worlds, consciousness and liberty. And it just grabbed me. And I wanted to meet more people and learn more about it. Michael Osterlink was a DC activist who was into that space. And I think it was him that connected me to Michael Strong, whom I got connected to professionally and helping start Flow, which ended up being conscious capitalism, run by John Mackey at Whole Foods, and Alex McCoven, who started Students for Liberty. And I started an informal group in DC called Conscious Entrepreneurs and Creatives, hosting events and co-hosting events with Flow in those mid 2000 period. And at one of those events, Max Borders showed up, and I met him. And since then, I've seen he really has grabbed that space by, the bull, the horns of the bull, whatever the phrase is. He's had events in Austin, Texas, that are really popular with conscious entrepreneurs. He's written books, and his recent book, After the Collapse, obviously is, what do we do as a society if we have a real collapse in it? And, those paying attention to the COVID hysteria know about the Great Reset crowd, and none of us really want that technocracy. Thank you very much. But, a lot of us do want something better. We always want something better. So what is that better? Well, Max at Social Evolution has some ideas building on some traditional fundamental human rights values and some new values that fall under the rubric of what's called integral values. It's going to be a good discussion. And so, Jeff, that's our intro of Max.
All right, very good. That's great. So, on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow Max to take control. Yes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much. And Jeff, I have to say, between your strong Great Lakes accent and my deep Southern accent, we have truly covered the gamut of accents today. I hope everybody can understand me. I'll be speaking slowly by default because due to my southernness, but I hope you'll carry on listening anyway. So let me start by thanking you guys for having me on. I did, and to be able to talk about my book after collapse. It's really this was written at a time, and just setting the context a little bit. This was written at a time when we have this climate of fear, I guess you could say. And I was certainly afraid. I didn't know what to expect, and there tends to be this submission instinct, this deference to power whenever there's something scary going on. We all want to look to Papa, as it were, to protect us, to secure things when things go bad. It's almost like we want mom when we're hurting, and we want dad when we're scared. And the government, as this sort of stands in for that, and in many respects, that tends to shore up hierarchy. So I want today to try to fit. It may be a bit like drinking from a fire hose, but I want to pull out some overarching themes from the book just to share with you with this context in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can um, share a presentation with you. Um, and this is clumsily called The Psychology of Fear and the Rise of Integral Liberalism. So first, one of the things that I enjoy talking about that is a subtext in both in the book and in a lot of my work is this idea of decentralization. That decentralized systems for gaining knowledge, for sharing knowledge or information, for governance, all manner of things is really helpful in the sense of anti-fragility. So I write a lot about rules tools and rules plus tools. So technology, governance systems, and rules plus tools or systems. And in this way, with better rules and better tools, we are able as a human species to self-organize to a far greater degree. And I assume that the folks listening to this or watching this are also interested in self-organization and the rules and tools by which and systems by which we self-organize are really starting to come online now. Okay. And so I think that decentralization is ultimately the functional or systems path to peace, freedom, and abundance, which are values I think we all share. And and yet today I really want to focus on re-architecting the moral universe. Okay, and this is one of the through lines of the book. It's not just about re-architecting this moral universe or reconfiguring it, readopting timeless values, but it's certainly one I want to focus on today because I while I love talking about decentralization and all of its beauty and all of its possibility, there's and that's really future looking. I think we can also look at the timeless traditions of the past and ancient wisdom and what it has to offer us in terms of um, how we can organize ourselves and live together day to day through conscious and continuous practice. So that's where we're going to head today. And I think the reason I want to start there is because when you start talking about abstractions like systems, you can get away from the heart and the mind and alignment between heart, gut, and mind, which begins with the self. So it's one thing to have a vision of the future, perhaps to see how things can unfold through the processes of decentralization. But it's quite another to be the change you want to see in the world, to paraphrase Gandhi or whomever. We have to start with self and extend outward in concentric circles to family, to community, to state, nation, and beyond. It's really one must begin with self, and that is about realigning with timeless values. But before we do that, I want to talk about this background of fear. So we're in a pandemic setting. Everyone's quite afraid, and there is this urge to control that it's a simultaneous urge to control and an urge to defer to powers who want to bring control, because people can confuse or conflate control on the one hand with security on the other. Okay, so the psychological background, I'm not, I'm not huge into Freud, I'm not a Freudian, but I think he had some interesting things to say. And one distinction he made was that between, and in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, that between eros and thanatos. So eros, according to Freud, is this urge to be generative. It's about beginnings. It's about life, emergent life, creation. And that urge in human beings is the urge to procreate, to bring things into the world, and so on. And it's one we have to acknowledge. Likewise, we have thanatos, which is sort of like its opposite. There's a sort of yin yang going on. And thanatos is really the urge to bring about death or endings. It's preoccupation with loss. It is a destructive urge. So rather than being a generative urge, it is a destructive urge. And let me just say, I'm not making any kind of moral valuations about these urges. They simply are. They are elements or features of humanity that we have to reckon with. And what I would say is the moral aspect of this is that we have to bring them into balance and have them understand those urges in their place. So sometimes we want the death drive or the destructive urge, and sometimes we want to indulge the generative urge. Okay? But to complicate matters, I want to bring in two more dimensions and cross them orthogonally to our eros thanatos, and that is the masculine urge, okay, which we're quite familiar with, particularly if we have penis-bearing males in the audience, okay? Now, the masculine instinct, the masculine urge is one of force. It is the urge to control. I call it the force, fuck, fight triad. It is about the exercise of coercion in order to bring about that control. So that masculine paradigm is really about bringing things into control through coercion, or at the very least through arresting something through power, okay? That is a very masculine instinct, and it's not to say that this is only in men, not at all. And matter of fact, we have, a lot of women have this masculine urge in them, just as, we have the animus and the anima in Jungian psychology. All of these forces are within us to some degrees. We might have hormones that dictate that they're stronger in some than in others, but this is basically a masculine instinct that is the urge to control. We also have the feminine in us all to varying degrees, but particularly in women, and that is the urge to flirt, to fawn, to facilitate, and indeed the urge to liberate, to let things flow. So the power of persuasion is much more a feminine instinct. And if you don't like these characterizations, just think of them as archetypes. Just think of them as archetypes and replace the feminine and masculine ascriptions with something that you do prefer. But I think that if we're being honest with ourselves about human history, the urge to control and the power of coercion is a much more masculine modality, and that the feminine modality is more about facilitation, care, flirtation, fawning, and the power of persuasion. It's sweet talk, as Deirdre McCluskey would say, who actually made a transition. So we have these four forces within us, and I want to use them as a kind of schematic to confer some kind of understanding with respect to why it is we are seeing what we're seeing in society. Because at the end of the day, it's internal psychological forces that drive human behavior, and our response to fear very often is takes certain kinds of patterns. So we have, when you cross these dimensions, you get four, you cross these axes, you get four basic dimensions: Eros masculine, Thanatos masculine, Eros feminine, and Thanatos feminine. And let's take them in turn. So the Eros masculine is the idea of exerting control in a constructive way. It's about building it, making it happen. It's about planned order. If there's not enough room in the city, we're going to build up. Oh yeah, well you built one and it looks like a big phallus. I'm going to build one that's taller. We're going to make room for people in this city. But it is really about that exertion through that generative instinct of Eros, but it is a masculine, more control-oriented kind of force. And localized, of course, that can be a very powerful and entrepreneurial force. We don't want to make any kind of judgments about it. We just want to say, in the end, and I don't want to give away the punchline, we want to bring these forces into balance. So Thanatos masculine is really the instinct in the face of fear to extinguish something, to shut it down, kill or be killed, or scorched earth policy. It's like zero tolerance. We've just got to end it now. Okay. That can be a healthy instinct from time to time, but again, it needs to be kept in its place. Eros feminine is an instinct I quite like, because I identify with it as the sort of ideological priors I happen to have. But it is an instinct to let things flow, let them grow. It emphasizes collaboration rather than control. And really, it's not about planned order, it's more about emergent order. It's about the things that happen when things are allowed to flow as they should within certain kinds of protocols or parameters that bring about a healthy order. Now, there's also the Thanatos feminine. Now, that's an instinct that's more like, I can't go on. The end is near. It's the sort of a depression, or it's the urge to maybe let things go and be prepared for change. This too can have healthy and unhealthy aspects, but in the face of fear, it might be resignation. So all four of these forces are with us, but I believe that with the pandemic, we saw an excess of this masculine energy. And what I mean by that is there was too much urge to control, and deference to that urge to control, too much of the submission instinct. So there's too much control from the top, not enough collaboration. There was too much hierarchy, not enough networks, bottom-up networks forming. There was too much planning, not enough emergent order, and too much coercion and not enough persuasion, too much compulsion and not enough compassion. And it's in these last two, I think, that so much can get confused. People want to talk about a compassionate society as one that doles out largesse to people in need, as if from some sort of algorithm, we sort of want to outsource our sense of responsibility to distant capitals and call that compassion when it's not compassion at all, because it relies on compulsion to be instantiated, taxation and redistribution. So in the wake of the pandemic, we're seeing a lot more of this excess of masculine energies, however framed. So too much, and in the wake of 9/11, there was too much Thanatos masculine. So you have Eros masculine, Thanatos masculine, and they're out of balance with these other forces that can be healthy and ought to be recognized as they struggle to be born and recognized in our society. So I want to talk about, usually I want to talk about modern technology, but today I want to talk about ancient wisdom, because I think we need to start with self and the discipline of moral engagement in daily practice in order to orient ourselves with balance in a world that can be scary. Okay, so this is really about forces in balance. So harness the feminine energies in all of us, don't suppress the masculine, seek balance, and engage the spheres of practice. They too bring balance. What are the spheres of practice? Okay, this is really the ancient wisdom stuff. So you're going to be like, you might, when you see this list, be like, Max, what the hell are you talking about? This is nothing new. This is nothing we don't already know. My contention is we have not only to remember these spheres of practice, of moral practice, and we must always see them as more than abstract rules. They're not just rules of thumb or something to be instantiated in law or appealed to in an op-ed. These are spheres of practice that must be actively and continuously practiced. And I can't emphasize that enough. So let's go through them, okay? So first is the practice of nonviolence. And yes, I have a very Western mind, but I find that as I get older, I'm finding more and more in the wisdom traditions of the East that can be integrated with our Western traditions. So liberalism as a doctrine says that the law should limit harm. So we have John Stuart Mill's non-harm doctrine. We have in libertarianism, we have the non-aggression axiom. So we do understand at some level, some abstract level, that you ought not initiate harm against other people. With integral liberalism, which is just my label for this, I say look east and practice ahimsa. Ahimsa in the yogic traditions, as Charlie will be familiar with, says we must practice this nonviolent disposition in thought, word, and deed. We must cultivate a disposition of nonviolence. So it's not enough just to appeal to a rule of non-harm. We also want to, in some sense, practice it in thought, word, and deed. So it's not just about failing to do something as action, but thinking before you act and practicing internally thinking nonviolent thoughts. And I know that can sound contradictory because it's so much of the time, it seems like our inner workings are but instincts or reflexes. But the Eastern traditions tell us just how much mastery we have over our dispositions. So how we get to this broader integral idea is transmutation of practice into principles and politics. So this is really a merger of East and West. This idea of ahimsa can go all the way outward from self and into the world. There's this great in the Yoga Sutras, and one of the interpreters of the Yoga Sutras talks about this practitioners of ahimsa who are meditators in the forest. And this is just like a mythology, but it's an interesting little story because it points to really what they're trying to get at here. And the idea was that the meditators, the yogis in the forest, were so good at meditating and practicing nonviolence in thought, word, and deed that the animals, the tiger and the cow, were unafraid and approached the waters to drink together, and that the animals only killed when they absolutely needed to. And the idea is that there was this spreading outward of this practice of ahimsa that was able to, in a positive way, infect the animals and people around them. So in this synthesis, you have much more of a robust tenet of liberalism, not just an abstract rule, but a daily practice. Okay. Let me go backwards. We also want to practice integrity. Again, not just an abstract rule. Liberalism might emphasize the law of contract, but adherence to one's principles and keeping one's commitments can be a daily, a conscious, continuous practice. This is also Satya from the Yoga Sutras. So I'm borrowing again from the Eastern traditions, integrating with our Western liberalism and saying, it's no accident that the word integrity also means a way that a system holds together. We talk about the integrity of a system. If it holds together despite diverse elements pulling on it. Yes, the building has integrity. It's going to hold up. Our society is going to have integrity through individual practiced acts of integrity, just like honoring your word, showing up on time, being a person of your word, and someone that other people can count on because they don't lie to themselves and others. This contributes to an overall social order that is much more in the sense of tensegrity or integrity with the wider system. We also want not just to practice toleration, although we do, that's the Western liberal idea, which means just, hey, you know, you do your thing, I'll do mine. You pray to your God, I'll pray to mine. And integral liberalism says to practice pluralism. Well, how do you practice pluralism? It sounds like that's a condition or a state. But the practice of pluralism means a sort of ongoing recognition of people's diversity of life plans. You don't just tolerate them as a rule, but seek to understand the world's pluralism is a condition in which human souls seek fulfillment and life meaning. So when we have these monolithic laws and means of doing things that are blanketed across the land, we're really, we're really failing to recognize that real diversity out there in the world, not diversity, equity, and inclusion, kind of jargon, but real diversity where people are living lives according to their particular conceptions of the good. So in practicing pluralism, we want to seek this greater overall truth among apparently disparate views in order to achieve greater understanding with other people who may be apparently different, where the underlying truth is this practiced pluralism and the kind of recognition of other human souls that comes into it. We also want to practice compassion. Liberalism says charity complements commerce. It's like, okay, do your thing, go out there, get rich, sell something to somebody, be an entrepreneur. And there's nobody who supports that more than I do. But integral liberalism, oh, and by the way, add to that when you can charity, throw something at a C3, little, $20 or so to help somebody out, help someone in your community, that kind of thing. But integral liberalism says compassion is not just a feeling, and charity is not a simple act of, getting on a GoFundMe campaign and throwing $20 at someone. It is really about a kind of attunement to how you can act compassionately to those around you, starting with your family members and extending outward into your community as much as you possibly can muster, to be a compassionate actor in the world. The Jews call this, oh gosh, it escapes me now. My baby mama's Jewish and she's going to be mad at me right now. But in any case, the Tikkun Olam is the Jewish tradition of healing the world through compassionate acts. And that's really what I think practice compassion means, and really integral liberalism needs, is this idea that we're not just functioning in a world of abstract rules and laws, but really active daily practices that make the world a better place. So I go back to this idea of mutual aid. Back in the turn of the century, there really was, there were 1 in 3 Americans was a member, back in the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. 1 in 3 Americans was a member of a mutual aid society. These were fraternities, sororities, not of the college kind, but like lodges, Elks Lodge, the Sons of Italy, the Masons, whatever you want. These were structures of mutual aid where members not only looked after each other, but gave each other a hard time. Sometimes compassion isn't really just, addressing their immediate needs. Sometimes it's saying no, and sometimes it's saying, there are better ways I can help you. I can give you advice. I can give you counsel or guidance. And this is something that government simply can't do. This is something that centralized bureaucracy simply can't do. They just dispense largesse in algorithmic fashion, and that again is not compassion. So we want to get to a society of practiced compassion. And we want to practice stewardship. Liberalism says institute private property. And absolutely, I want to know the difference between mine and thine so we can trade. Otherwise, there would be no precondition of trade. But integral liberalism says yes, and practice stewardship. That means if you're an office holder, you have a position, you control some asset, you control some piece of property. You have a responsibility to be a good steward of it, because perhaps you'll leave it to someone else. You might sell it to someone else, sure, but you might leave it to someone who needs it. You might bequeath it to someone who needs it. And so stewardship is really about this idea of, in whatever position you can, leaving the world better than you found it. So I want to, invite the listeners today to move to mastery. Now, I have a whole lot of other things to say about, the pandemic. I spend the first good part of my book talking, diagnosing the ways in the book After Collapse, diagnosing the ways in which our society is breaking down, whether that's the breakdown of hierarchy, our belief in the liberal order, or our basic constitutional order, the breakdown of community and mutual aid, as I said, of collective intelligence, the way we know things about the world and share that knowledge with each other so that we can act in some reality-based way, the breakdown of our discourse and civil order, and the breakdown, of course, the federal government with this profligate spending, debt spending. These are all these are all breakdowns of society that we're going to have to acknowledge. And I encourage you to read the book to get the gory details on the dimensions on which at least American society is breaking down. And I wanted to talk about this mastery of our morals today in the face of that, because that's really what every one of us can do in order to respond to adversity. And I'm afraid to say, I think a lot of adversity is coming, and it's not for the powers that be trying their best to it's the in an effort to stave off certain kinds of social problems. The powerful are going to create far larger problems than exist, and we're all going to have to pick up those pieces as individuals. So I would say, again, I start with self and that moral order that we want to reconstitute in our individual, parts of the universe, extend that out to our communities, and then to the world. Because if all of us follow these ancient practices with these integral upgrades, I truly believe that we can self-organize as free people to solve all manner of problems, especially through technological means, which I can talk about in another day. And as we bring the forces into balance, again, I want to repeat, to control our fear, resist that submission instinct, harness the feminine energy and all of us, bringing it into balance with the masculine. Don't suppress the masculine, because sometimes it takes that masculine energy to overcome certain obstacles, but keep it local and seek balance with the feminine, and engage in those spheres of practice, because they indeed bring balance in the world. My name's Max Borders. I hope you'll check out the Social Singularity, which is my work about the Decentralist Manifesto. You can also buy After Collapse, which is a lot of the threads in this talk. And follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and all the rest. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over to these guys and stop sharing.
All right. Thanks very much, Max. That was great. And just as a quick little aside here for everybody else, I did bring up while you were talking, here's Max's spot on Amazon, so you can scope him out and get that book and a couple other little things to learn about. So that was very good. I did want to start out by saying, it was a very good look at reality, and that's always the fallacy for many, is that they always have either some aspiration to optimal areas or perfection or the classic unicorn mentality. And that's not real. That never will happen. So let's be real and try to build towards reality like what you're describing here. What's interesting, and I don't know what your take on this is because of this pandemic, it's suddenly got a lot of people, because there's certain people always trying to, like what you're doing, to be the activist to get things to happen, but we're waiting for the person who's in the middle to actually get off the couch and do something. And this pandemic kind of went two different ways, because there's a group of people that are pushing back against the schools, that want to teach their own kids, that want to start businesses out of their homes suddenly. So we've been kind of like, well, where you been for forever? We've been waiting for you people to do these things. And just in this last week, all 50 states now have election audits underway, where it was only in one or two states, and that's all a ground up thing. So is that the beginnings of some of this movement towards where you see we need to go? Because even though there's going to be adversity, which probably sounds like the clingers on of the past system not wanting to let go as this new emergence, because this really is that flow like you were describing happening from the bottom up, is that going to win out at this stage of the game?
You know, so there's so many embedded questions there. I'm going to try to pick it apart a little bit. And in so doing, I want to focus on one particular aspect, and that's, just electoral politics. Um, I don't want to offend folks here. I do respect people who are active in electoral politics, but I see it as I'm not so sanguine about it. I think it is electoral politics creates the illusion that if we cry our teardrops into the ocean, the tide will turn. And I just don't think that that's going to happen. I have this metaphor that I use sometimes about what if we woke up tomorrow morning, picked up our smartphones, and there was only two apps, the red app and the blue app, and those were the only choices, right? And the country tends to tribalize around this false choice, when our governance systems can be much more like the smart devices on which we operate, and we can self-select into groups with different conceptions of the good and govern ourselves to a far greater, more distributed or decentralized degree. So I'm not, while I know that we need to hold up, people who vote and are active in partisan politics are going to are a bulwark against this sort of rise of authoritarian powers on both the left and right, who are thoroughly governed by this masculine instinct to control everything under the sun, coming from their particular partisan tribes. But no, I'm more sanguine about the rise of cryptocurrencies, of distributed ledgers, and our ability to, and I believe that we may find ourselves in a scenario where we have far more decentralized pockets of authority on territories. So it need not just be territory that we, opt out of different systems. You guys are opting out of the healthcare system, it sounds like, which is one of the things that brings you together. And I absolutely, applaud you for doing so, because we really need a far less monolithic healthcare system. We need far more experimentation, both on the insurance side and on the provider side, in terms of the mode and manner in which we treat people. And I believe that the bringing into balance this feminine paradigm of flow will allow for this great, much more consent-based systems of experimentation and governance. And that's really where I'm headed in my work, is that overall theory. Now, with respect to the pandemic, I think, there is a very powerful system at work, a top-down system of messaging, and the social media companies are obviously are playing handmaidens to this. They've been hauled before Congress enough times to see that if they don't defer to these bureaucratic agencies' wisdom and pronouncements, that their businesses are going to be attacked or they're going to be regulated in some way that they don't like. So they're playing nice and they're playing handmaidens to power. And that is no good for any kind of minority voices on healthcare, on pandemics, or other matters. And we're seeing this play out in all manner of ways, starting, from the potential for cheap therapies like ivermectin, all the way to potential risks of the vaccines.
Very good. Charles?
Yes, Jeff, thank you. And Max, that was a terrific presentation. Like I said at the intro, this integrative stuff really is fascinating. And how have you personally adopted these integrated philosophies in your own life? You mentioned a bit of feminine eros. Um, Tell us more about how your conscious practice of your ideal combo in an integrated way has impacted you over the past few years in your direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So certainly, getting into the decentralization space very early on, where decentralization technologies sort of, and really being a certain kind of liberal, what I call a liberal, or what others may call by another name, but really this, anti-authoritarianism and this idea of reconstituting different kinds of emergent order, that 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 has always been with me. I don't think I needed to practice it. I just needed to recognize it and integrate it. For me, the five spheres of practice that I enumerated, the nonviolence, integrity, compassion, stewardship, and so on. Those are the ones that I've really had to practice, and particularly online. So I've been finding in sort of in my internal practices, and following the yogic traditions and indeed the Buddhist traditions. It doesn't make me a Buddhist. It doesn't make me a Hindu or anything like that. But being interested in the Yoga Sutras and interested in Hindu mythology, and and in Buddhism, it really, what I admire about these traditions is the extent to which things are about practice. It's about beginning with self and allowing those practices to radiate outward. That is to me, an important thing. I think that the West lacks in our orientation, and I really wanted to bring that fusion or that synthesis together in my own liberalism that I'm bringing with me, I guess you could say. And by the way, liberalism isn't meant to contrast with conservatism. It's meant to contrast with authoritarianism or illiberal doctrine. So I hope that's clear. Um, so I, but Charles, the practices for me, the best place to start, I think, is with your family and online. It's so easy to have some troll or asshole say something to you online that just gets under your skin. And right there is an opportunity to practice um, engagement in a dispassionate way, or even in a compassionate way. That's easy. That's just low hanging fruit. It gives you so many opportunities to practice, but especially with your family. You know, the woman I referred to, talking about Tikkun Olam, she and I have had a baby recently together, and it can, everybody who has kids knows that it can be really frustrating and people can have bad days. So that, practice just of nonviolence in thought, word, and deed when you're around those that you love, or practices of compassion for people who are having a bad day and who are not as in control of their emotions, man, those are just constant opportunities for you to hone your skills at integral liberalism, and it's what I'm thinking of as its five spheres or tenets. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And if I can do a quick follow up, Jeff, I know I see
Sure.
Brittany's hand up.
Yeah, and Chris.
Um, what you say gets to something I think that has a lot of folks concerned, and that is how successfully the Great Reset elitists uh, have divided and conquered us through the trolls, through the differences in response, even among husbands and wives around this past year of hysteria. Um, People are, I mean, social media has become a toxic stew. Um, how do you see some of these integral practices, which sound nice, they are nice, as a way to maybe build some bridges to help us get past the chaos?
Absolutely, no doubt, no doubt. I mean, starting with personal practice is, of course, going to be the way. There are, algorithmic weights that are helping to fracture us. And look, I think about 50% of that movie, the social dilemma, is bullshit. I'll just be honest. I think, they overstate the case, particularly since most people who use social media have agency. And they sort of imagine us as these, mindless zombies, or, drones that are slaves to algorithms and, at the behest of these mega corporations. Come on, let's we can do better than that. But the way we do better than that is to seize our agency, is to really get back to these daily conscious continuous practices. And in so doing, we can do things like reach across apparently partisan or ideological divides to really interesting people with whom we can form friendships. I have so many, I have developed on social media personally so many diverse relationships with bright, beautiful people who don't share my ideological priors, but I find the more I engage them calmly and with a genuine interest in finding common ground, that I not only forge these lifelong relationships, but both of us through the dialogue discover something new in the process and start to find synthesis. This that we are representing facets of a larger truth, and that we're two hands on different parts of the elephant. And the more that we talk and the more that we put our hands on the elephant together, despite our different perspectives on the elephant, the more we discover of the elephant. And that's been just a beautiful thing. And social media has facilitated that for me.
It's a good way to make use of it. Chris, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, Max,
Hey, Chris.
looking at the collapse of various things, it seems to me that the one thing that collapsed really a long, long time ago, and I would say, maybe going back to around 1900, was or were the colleges. I mean, they were taken over by socialists. They're still run by socialists, and you know, can we have a civilized society and have colleges, or are we going to have to just burn them down to have a civilized society? And it's rather ironic because if colleges don't want a civilized society, they're not going to be around either. I mean, they promote all this nonsense, and they've been promoting nonsense really for 100 years. And why did they decide they hated humanity in the first place? I don't get it. I mean, how do we solve this dilemma here? I mean, we've got a few token colleges like Hillsdale out there, but most of them are overwhelmingly destructive. I mean, and I trust somebody with a high school diploma more than I trust somebody with a PhD from Harvard.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, and I don't know what kind of audience we have here in terms of whether or not they agree with you. I tend to agree with you. I think that colleges have become in great measure indoctrination factories, and I don't think they have been. That it's not just that they've been taken over by one side of the political spectrum or the other, and I think it's been that the degree to which they've become illiberal activists rather than educators. What heartens me, though, is what we're doing right now. I, you know, we can reconstitute education in all manner of ways through these new and different media. We're also going to be able, through distributed ledger technology, to bring some kind of provenance or proof of, because look, all colleges and universities are crude symbols, crude signals that are designed to demonstrate someone's competence as they go into the workforce. Unless you're actually going into academia, college really doesn't mean anything except to provide some sort of signal of your competence and of your experience. With distributed ledger technology, where you can have some chain of provenance, how much you've learned and demonstrate how much you learned, we also have the ability to create portfolios, to show your writing, to do all these other things. This cartelization around higher education is just no longer necessary. Like, I just think we obviate it. I think what we're doing right now obviates higher education, and the extent to which we can create parallel systems where where half the country's kids are doing stuff like this instead of college and finding ways to demonstrate their value to potential employers or even to be entrepreneurs themselves. Excuse my French, but fuck higher education. We'll move around it.
It's happening similarly, like with the idea of certification over licensure with doctors and the like. So there's movements on all fronts. Brittany, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hi Max. You mentioned blockchain and distributed ledger technology, and I'm just wondering if you can give any practical examples of, for people like us who are interested in setting up mutual aid societies around healthcare, around special needs care, elder care, education. What are some practical ways that we should be looking at these technologies that can really make a difference for us?
That is such a great question. And I'm really glad that you asked it, because I am one who's in many regards failed at trying to do that. I'm a failed entrepreneur. I was a nonprofit entrepreneur. I am a nonprofit entrepreneur, but some of the things I tried to do at Social Evolution, which is the nonprofit, was to use technology to create some of these systems. The problem is that I discovered with trying to create a mutual aid system like this on blockchain. Now, look, so I'm going to get to your practical question in a minute. Like, how can we be practical about it? The entrepreneurial or innovative aspect of this, the cutting edge, sometimes you don't need the cutting edge. And that's a good thing, because what I tried to do was to create a prototype mutual aid society that would allow people to use certain kind of governance configuration to dispense funds to people who claim needs. And in some respects, it's like using these technologies to form a cooperative that resembles a corporation like Liberty Health Share or a mutual aid society of that stripe. But I wasn't going to try to bite off, in the regulatory environment that is healthcare, try to bite off a healthcare mutual aid society. Although I think that's, if someone can do that, that's really going to be interesting. There are a couple reasons that this project failed, but one is that the SEC and the individual states have so many regulations on this stuff. It would have taken an army of lawyers just to get anything past those regulations. So I'm under no illusions about the extent and power of the authoritarian state with respect to these kinds of experiments. Most of the experiments I wanted to try with mutual aid on a distributed ledger were thwarted by those very regulations, and it was just too costly for me as a little nonprofit to try to execute against. That being said, right in the tax code, there's a 501c8 organization that you can look at, that you can just develop a bricks and mortar one. We don't need blockchain and tokens necessarily yet for this. The only reason you might need that is if you were trying to maintain or sustain a mutual aid organization in the cloud beyond the grip of the authoritarian reach, and that's really risky and difficult. So within the system we have, warts and all, going back to those structures that have been on the books for a long time, and you just using good old web-based technology for a mutual aid organization is probably a good backstop for the moment. So that would be the first suggestion for someone who wanted to try to organize this way. If I'm not mistaken, there's just good old-fashioned entrepreneurial efforts like what's going on here. I mean, I assume that Charlie and Jeff are in their projects around healthcare are a means to hack the system entrepreneurially and disrupt the traditional model of insurance and the traditional model of care provision with cash only doctors and forming networks around that kind of stuff. We need to, and I'll try to explain it in a quick and tidy story. Remember that there was a legal gray area on about 2012, 2013. It used to be that people would say you're crazy in the early 2000s if you ever hitched a ride. That was just something that was dangerous and only foolish people did. And it probably there are, in some states, rules on the books against it. But people who are good at hacking legal gray areas in an entrepreneurial way came up with an app that connected providers of rides. And what we got out of that was Uber. And the traditional cartels of concentrated benefits and dispersed costs, where you have the special interest accreting or in Washington concentrated benefits to those special interest and dispersed costs to the taxpayers, to everyone else who are not knowledgeable and have no incentive to know what the hell a mohair subsidy is, much less what mohair is, right? You invert that process with these distributed technologies that create rapid mass constituencies. So if you can find a legal gray area and develop a technology in an entrepreneurial way that allows mass constituencies to start using and benefiting from the service or good in that way, it's really, really difficult to roll it back. Now, it's not to say that Uber didn't suffer some setbacks from the authorities. It is rather to say that at the end of the day, they survived it and are still with us. And now we hitch rides with our phones. So there are ways of doing this that can be imperfect, but entrepreneurs and innovators out there can keep plugging away. People like Charlie and Jeff.
Appreciate that there. Max, we've got time here for one quickie question and one quickie response. Jim, why don't you give us a good question here?
Okay. I'll even show you my picture. Can I show my picture for a minute?
Sure.
No, you
do.
canceled me. My camera stopped. No, actually, it's okay. I just want to say thanks, Max, and I got to run in a second, but where is it? I like what you're talking about. I'm kind of working on along the same lines and putting something into a physical structure, looking at time banks and some reorganization, decentralization, urban agriculture, everything to support communities. So,
beautiful.
So perhaps, afterwards I'll get your information or look online or from Jeff and we can get in touch. But thank you. Yeah.
Hey, thanks very much, and stick with it. These kind of community building efforts are going to make us more resilient if the proverbial poo hits the fan.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
No, and I was going to say, and this is great because this becomes the purpose of what we're doing here is being able to keep this going like this. So that's where this continuing the conversation comes into play. And then just as a quick reminder as we cut out of here today is that, coming back to the site down here is where you can see the link. This video will be posted at all of these locations. So on that note, Max, I want to tell you thanks so much for a fantastic and enlightening day.
My pleasure. I really appreciate your having me, and I look forward to hearing from anybody who wants to reach out.